What happens when the most protected secrets of the British royal family are exposed by those sworn to protect them? When Prince William discovers a truth so devastating that it shatters everything he believed about his stepmother, the very foundations of the monarchy tremble. Irritation. This is the story of betrayal, family loyalty, and the moment when royal composure cracked under the weight of unbearable truth. The morning rain hammered against the windows of Kensington Palace with unusual ferocity, as if nature itself sensed the storm brewing within the royal walls. Prince William stood motionless in his private study, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, staring at the documents spread across his mahogany desk. The papers, still damp from where they had been hastily delivered, contained revelations that would change everything he thought he knew about his family. Detective Inspector Sarah Morrison had been reluctant to bring these findings directly to the prince. As a 20-year veteran of the Metropolitan Police's special branch, she had handled sensitive royal matters before, but nothing quite like this. Investigation had begun as a routine security review following reports of unusual financial activities within certain royal household accounts. What they uncovered was far more sinister than anyone had anticipated. "Your Royal Highness," she had said earlier that morning, her voice carefully measured, "I believe you need to see this before anyone else does." The documents revealed a pattern of manipulation and deception that stretched back years. Camilla, the Queen Consort, had been systematically undermining William's relationship with his father, King Charles, while simultaneously working to diminish his standing within the royal hierarchy. But it went deeper than simple family politics. The evidence suggested she had been feeding private family information to certain media outlets, orchestrating negative coverage of William and Catherine whenever it served her purposes. Most damaging of all was the revelation about Diana's memorial fund. Money that should have gone to the charitable causes his mother had championed had been quietly redirected through a complex network of shell companies, ultimately benefiting organizations with direct ties to Camilla's own interests. It was a betrayal of his mother's legacy that cut William to his very core. The sound of footsteps in the corridor outside broke through his concentration. William quickly gathered the documents, his mind racing with the implications of what he had learned. He had maintained a cordial relationship with Camilla, respecting his father's choice and understanding the importance of family unity for the monarchy's stability. Second, he had bidden his tongue through countless awkward moments, forced smiles through state dinners, and even defended her publicly when critics questioned her role in the royal family. But this changed everything. The door to his study opened without a knock, a privilege afforded to very few people in William's life. Camilla entered with her characteristic confidence, dressed impeccably as always, her smile perfectly practiced for whatever cameras might be waiting outside the palace walls later that day. "William, darling," she said in her refined accent, settling herself into the chair across from his desk without invitation.
"I thought we might discuss the arrangements for next week's engagement."
"The children's hospital visit, you know. I think it would be wonderful if we could present a united front as a family." William looked up from the documents, studying her face with new eyes. Every gesture, every carefully chosen word now seemed calculated, designed to manipulate and control. A woman who had inserted herself into his family after his mother's death, who had slowly but systematically worked to erase Diana's influence and replace it with her own, sat before him now, completely unaware that her carefully constructed facade was about to crumble. A united front, William repeated slowly, his voice carrying an edge that made Camilla's smile falter slightly. "That's interesting terminology, considering recent revelations about just how united our family really is." Camilla's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her features before she regained her composure. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean, dear. Is something troubling you?" William stood slowly, his full height and bearing suddenly seeming to fill the room with an authority that reminded everyone present exactly who he was and what he represented. The easy familiarity that had characterized the relationship for years evaporated in an instant, replaced by the cold formality of royal protocol. "Detective Inspector Morrison paid me a visit this morning," William said, his voice steady but carrying an unmistakable steel. "She brought some very interesting reading material." The color drained from Camilla's face so quickly that for a moment William almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But the memory of his mother's legacy being betrayed, of years of calculated manipulation, hardened his resolve. "I don't know what you think you've discovered," Camilla began, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "But I assure you that whatever gossip or speculation Bank records, William interrupted, his tone cutting through her protest like a blade. Financial transfers, media contacts, phone records, email correspondence. This isn't gossip, Camilla. For days, this is evidence. The silence that followed was deafening. Outside, the rain continued its relentless assault on the windows, but inside the study, time seemed suspended. Camilla's carefully maintained composure began to crack, revealing glimpses of the calculating mind that had orchestrated years of subtle manipulation. People called them out of hand. "Your father?" she started. But William held up a hand to stop her. "My father has been blinded by his feelings for you," he said, the words coming out harder than he had intended. "But that blindness ends now. Did you really think you could betray my mother's memory, manipulate our family dynamics, and line your own pockets with charity funds without consequences?" Camilla rose from her chair, her own anger beginning to surface as her attempts at manipulation failed to take hold. "You have no idea what I've sacrificed for this family," she snapped, her refined accent slipping slightly to reveal harder edges. "The criticism I've endured, the constant comparisons to your precious mother. I've done everything to support Charles, to support the monarchy, by selling private family information to journalists?" William's voice rose for the first time, his legendary composure finally cracking. "By redirecting charity funds meant for children and victims of landmines, by systematically working to undermine my position and Catherine's?" The accusations hung in the air between them like physical blows. Camilla's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out. The game was up, and she knew it. "I want you to pack your personal belongings," William continued, his voice returning to its earlier steady tone. "All of them. Today. You will remove yourself from this palace and from any official royal residence. Your staff privileges are revoked effective immediately." "You can't do this," Camilla whispered, but her voice lacked conviction. "Charles won't allow it."
"I'm the queen consort."
"I have rights, responsibilities, rights that you forfeited the moment you chose to betray this family," William replied. "As for my father, he will be informed of everything, every detail, every betrayal, every stolen pound from my mother's charitable legacy." The transformation in Camilla's demeanor was startling. The refined royal facade completely fell away, revealing a woman who had been cornered and was now fighting for her survival. Her eyes flashed with a mixture of anger and desperation that William had never seen before. "Your mother was weak," she hissed, abandoning all pretense of civility. "She couldn't hold on to her husband, couldn't adapt to royal life, couldn't do what needed to be done. I saved Charles from a life of misery with that pathetic, attention-seeking." The sound of William's hands slamming against the desk echoed through the room like a gunshot. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet, carrying all the authority of his royal lineage and the fury of a son defending his mother's memory. "Get out," he said, each word precisely enunciated. "Get your things and get out of my sight before I do something that would make tomorrow's headlines for all the wrong reasons." Camilla stared at him for a long moment, perhaps finally understanding that she had pushed too far, revealed too much, and now faced consequences that her carefully cultivated royal status could not protect her from. And without another word, she turned and walked from the room, her heels clicking against the marble floor with a finality that seemed to echo through the palace corridors. William remained standing behind his desk long after she had gone, his hands still trembling slightly from the confrontation. The rain outside showed no signs of stopping, and he found himself wondering if this storm was just beginning. The evidence against Camilla was damning, but the implications for the royal family, for his father, and for the monarchy itself were staggering. He picked up his secure phone and dialed a number he rarely used, one that connected him directly to the most trusted advisors in the royal household. There would be crisis management meetings, carefully worded statements, and probably months of damage control ahead. But first, there was his father to consider, and a conversation that would break an old man's heart while potentially saving the monarchy's future. As he waited for the call to connect, William looked out at the rain-soaked gardens of Kensington Palace and thought about his mother. Diana had always told him that truth had a way of surfacing eventually, no matter how deeply buried. Today her words had proven prophetic in ways she could never have imagined. The emergency meeting convened in the blue drawing room 90 minutes later, its ornate walls having witnessed countless royal crises over the centuries, but perhaps none quite as personally devastating as this one. Sir Edward Whitmore, the King's private secretary, sat rigid in his chair, the color having drained from his distinguished features as William methodically presented the evidence that Detective Inspector Morrison had compiled. The pattern of financial irregularities stretches back 7 years. William explained, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was revealing. Small amounts at first, easily explained away as administrative errors or legitimate expenses, but the amounts grew larger and the paper trail more complex. Lady Margaret Thornfield, the longest-serving member of the royal household staff and a woman who had counseled 3 generations of monarchs, studied the documents with the careful attention of someone who had seen too much palace intrigue in her lifetime. Her silence spoke volumes about the gravity of the situation. The media connections are perhaps even more troubling, William continued, passing another file across the polished mahogany table. Text messages, email exchanges, even recorded phone conversations. She's been feeding information to specific journalists for years, timing releases to maximize damage to certain family members while protecting her own interests. Sir Edward finally found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. My God, William. The implications for the monarchy's reputation, for public trust, are catastrophic, William finished. Which is why we need to move quickly and decisively. My father cannot know about this until we have a complete strategy in place. The shock could kill him given his recent health concerns. The room fell silent, except for the persistent drumming of rain against the tall windows. King Charles's declining health had been a carefully guarded secret, known only to his closest advisors and family members. The stress of learning about Camilla's betrayal, coming on top of his ongoing medical treatments, could indeed prove fatal. Lady Margaret spoke for the first time since the meeting began, her cultured voice carrying the weight of decades of royal service. Has she been informed that her activities have been discovered? I confronted her this morning, William replied, the memory of that conversation still fresh and painful. Protocol, she denied nothing once presented with the evidence. In fact, she became quite revealing about her true feelings toward my family. He recounted the confrontation, including Camilla's venomous words about Diana. The effect on the assembled advisors was immediate and visible. These were people who had served the royal family with unwavering loyalty, who had weathered scandals and crises with professional detachment, but the calculated nature of Camilla's betrayal seemed to shake them to their core. Reported to the opinion of sudden sections immediately, Sir Edward declared, his earlier shock transforming into decisive action. Her access to family communications, financial accounts, and official state business cannot continue for another moment. I've already informed her that she needs to pack her belongings, William said. But we need to ensure this is handled with absolute discretion. A feeding frenzy unlike anything we've seen since your mother's death, Lady Margaret finished grimly. The public's relationship with the Queen Consort has always been complicated. This would destroy any remaining goodwill and potentially damage the monarchy beyond repair. Detective Inspector Morrison, who had remained silent throughout the meeting, finally spoke up. Your Royal Highness, there's something else you should know. Our investigation uncovered evidence that suggests this morning's confrontation may not have been the Queen Consort's first indication that her activities were being scrutinized. Protocol, William turned to her sharply. What do you mean? We believe she became aware of our investigation approximately 3 weeks ago. Some of the financial activity we were tracking suddenly stopped, and certain digital communications were hastily deleted. It's possible she's been preparing for this moment. The implications hung heavy in the air. If Camilla had been preparing for exposure, she might have contingency plans, potentially including her own media strategy to control the narrative. And the woman who had manipulated family dynamics for years would not go quietly into exile. We need to speak to His Majesty, Sir Edward said finally, the weight of his words evident in his tone. Regardless of the health implications, he has the right to know what's been happening in his own household. William nodded slowly, dreading the conversation that lay ahead. I'll speak to him this afternoon, after his medical appointment. Dr. Harrison can be present in case the shock proves too much. As the meeting broke up and the advisors scattered to begin implementing their crisis management protocols, William found himself alone with Lady Margaret. The elderly woman had served as an unofficial grandmother figure to him since childhood, and her opinion carried special weight in his decisions. "You did the right thing, William," she said quietly, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Your mother would be proud of how you've handled this." The mention of Diana threatened to break through William's carefully maintained composure. "She used to warn me about people who would try to use our family for their own gain. Verity, I just never imagined it would be someone so close to the center of everything." "Your mother was a remarkable judge of character," Lady Margaret replied. She saw through false loyalty long before others did. Perhaps that's why certain people were so eager to see her influence diminish." The observation carried implications that William wasn't quite ready to explore. The idea that Camilla's betrayal might have roots that stretched back to Diana's lifetime, that his mother might have been fighting battles he was only now beginning to understand, was almost too painful to contemplate. Meanwhile, 3 floors above in her private apartments, Camilla was indeed packing, but not in the defeated manner William might have expected. Her movements were efficient and purposeful, guided by plans she had hoped never to implement, but had prepared nonetheless. For years of careful observation and strategic thinking had taught her that in the royal family, as in any complex political structure, those who survived longest were those who always had an exit strategy. Her personal assistant, Margaret Chen, worked alongside her in nervous silence. The young woman had served the queen consort faithfully for 4 years, but the tension in the room was unmistakable, and the sudden order to pack everything immediately had not been explained.
Ma'am, Margaret ventured carefully. Should I arrange for transportation?
"And where should I tell the staff we're relocating to?" Camilla paused in her packing, considering her response carefully. Margaret was loyal but naive, and the fewer people who knew the full scope of what was happening, the better. "We'll be staying at Raynell House for the foreseeable future," Camilla replied, referencing her private residence in Wiltshire, the one property that remained entirely hers, independent of royal ownership or oversight. "And Margaret, I need you to understand that everything that happens today must remain absolutely confidential. There are family matters at play that go beyond what might seem apparent." Margaret nodded quickly, though confusion was evident in her expression. She had worked in royal service long enough to know when not to ask questions, but the urgency of the situation was unlike anything she had experienced. As Camilla continued packing, her phone buzzed with an encrypted message from a contact saved simply as JH. The message was brief but clear. "Situation compromised. Implement Protocol 7 immediately. All assets secure." James Henderson had been Camilla's private security consultant for 8 years, though his role extended far beyond traditional protection services. A former MI5 operative with extensive experience in information management and crisis communication, he had helped Camilla navigate the complex web of royal politics while building her own network of influence and protection. Protocol 7 was their most extreme contingency plan, designed for the scenario they had always hoped would never come to pass: complete exposure of her activities and immediate removal from royal protection. It involved not just physical relocation, but a comprehensive media strategy designed to control the narrative before her enemies could define it. Within an hour of receiving Henderson's message, carefully planted stories would begin appearing in certain media outlets. Stories that painted William as unstable, jealous of his father's happiness, and increasingly difficult to work with behind palace walls. By evening, questions would be raised about his fitness for future kingship, particularly given the concerning pattern of conflicts with family members that anonymous sources would be happy to detail. It was a nuclear option that would damage the entire royal family, but if Camilla was going down, she had no intention of going down alone. The sound of vehicles arriving in the palace courtyard drew her attention to the window. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could see several unmarked security vehicles, their purpose unmistakable to someone who had spent years learning to read the subtle signs of palace crisis management. Her expulsion from the royal family was being handled with the same discreet efficiency that characterized all major royal decisions, but the presence of additional security suggested that someone was taking no chances about how she might respond to being cornered. A soft knock at her apartment door interrupted her observations. Margaret answered it to find a senior palace guard, his expression carefully neutral but his posture suggesting this was not a social call. "Ma'am," he addressed Camilla formally, "His Royal Highness Prince William has requested that your departure from the palace be completed within the next 2 hours. The transportation has been arranged, and additional security personnel are available to ensure your privacy during the transition." The politeness of the language could not disguise what was essentially an eviction notice delivered with royal authority. Camilla nodded graciously, her years of training in public composure serving her well even in this moment of personal catastrophe. "Please inform His Royal Highness that I appreciate his consideration for my privacy," she replied, her tone carrying just enough edge to suggest that privacy was not her primary concern. "I should be ready to depart within the hour." As the guard withdrew, Camilla returned to her packing with renewed urgency. She had always known this day might come, had always understood that her position in the royal family existed at the pleasure of others and could be revoked without warning. But knowing something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally were entirely different matters. Now, the life she had built so carefully, the status she had fought so hard to achieve, the power she had accumulated so patiently, all of it was being stripped away in a single afternoon because a police investigation had uncovered activities she had been certain would never see the light of day. But Camilla had not survived decades in the brutal world of royal politics by accepting defeat gracefully. If William thought exposing her secrets would end this quietly, he was about to discover just how much damage a cornered queen could inflict on the very institution that was casting her out. The private medical wing of Windsor Castle had never felt more sterile or unwelcoming as William made his way through its quiet corridors that afternoon. King Charles was recovering from his latest treatment in the comfort of his private suite, unaware that his son was about to deliver news that would shatter the carefully constructed world he had built around his second marriage. Dr. Amanda Harrison, the king's personal physician for the past 12 years, met William outside the royal suite. Her expression was grave, reflecting both her medical concerns and her awareness of the extraordinary circumstances that had prompted this urgent meeting. "His Majesty is stable today," she reported quietly, "but his emotional state has been fragile since the last round of treatments. Whatever you need to discuss with him, I strongly recommend we keep my medical team on standby." He had spent the past 2 hours rehearsing how to present the evidence against Camilla in a way that would minimize the shock to his father's already weakened system. But there was no gentle way to reveal that the woman Charles loved and trusted had been systematically betraying their family for years. The king was seated in his favorite armchair by the window, dressed in a comfortable burgundy robe, when William entered the room. Charles looked older than his years, the recent medical treatments having taken their toll, but his eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had guided him through decades of royal duty. "William," Charles said with genuine warmth, "this is an unexpected pleasure. Pilla's hospital charity visit next week." The mention of Camilla sent a sharp pain through William's chest. In a few minutes, his father's world would be completely different, and there would be no returning to the innocent assumptions that currently brought such contentment to Charles's features. "Father, I need to discuss something very serious with you," William began, settling into the chair across from the king. "Dr. Harrison is here because what I'm about to tell you may be quite shocking." Charles's expression immediately shifted to concern, his paternal instincts engaging as he studied his son's face. "Has something happened to Catherine? The children?" "No, father, they're all safe." "This concerns Camilla." The relief that flashed across Charles's features was heartbreaking, knowing how quickly it would be replaced by devastation. "Oh, thank goodness, you had me terrified for a moment." "What's wrong? Is she unwell?" William reached into his briefcase and withdrew a carefully organized folder containing the most damning evidence against Camilla. His hands were steadier than he had expected, though his heart was racing as he prepared to detonate a bomb in his father's emotional landscape. "Father, I need you to look at these documents very carefully. They represent evidence gathered during a security investigation that began 3 weeks ago." Charles accepted the folder with curious confusion, his reading glasses already in hand. As his eyes began to scan the financial records, William watched his father's expression change with painful slowness, confusion giving way to disbelief, then to horror, and finally to a devastated understanding that seemed to age him a decade in mere minutes. "These bank transactions," Charles whispered, his voice barely audible, "they show money being moved from Diana's memorial fund, but that's impossible. Camilla would never—" "There's more, father. Much more." William guided his father through the evidence methodically, explaining the media contacts, the leaked private information, the systematic campaign to undermine certain family members while protecting Camilla's own interests. With each revelation, Charles seemed to sink deeper into his chair, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him with crushing force. The phone records, Charles said finally, staring at a particular document with trembling hands. These show calls to journalists on the same days that private family conversations were reported in the tabloids. Conversations that only family members knew about. Yes, Father. She's been selling our privacy, our trust, our mother's legacy, all of it, for years. The silence that followed was profound. Dr. Harrison moved closer to the king, monitoring his vital signs without being obvious about it, ready to intervene if the emotional shock proved too much for his compromised system. I confronted her this morning, William continued gently, and she didn't deny any of it. In fact, she said some very cruel things about Mother, things that suggest this betrayal may have deeper roots than we realized. Charles looked up sharply, and for a moment William saw a flash of the regal authority that had defined his father's reign. What did she say about your mother? William hesitated, knowing that Camilla's vicious words would inflict additional pain, but understanding that his father deserved to know the full scope of what they were dealing with. He recounted the confrontation, including Camilla's venomous characterization of Diana as weak and attention-seeking. The transformation in Charles was immediate and startling. The frail, vulnerable man who had been struggling with medical treatments vanished, replaced by a monarch whose authority had been challenged and whose family had been attacked. When he spoke, his voice carried a steel that reminded everyone present exactly who he was. Where is she now? Packing her belongings. I've ordered her removed from all royal residences immediately. Her access to family communications and financial accounts has been revoked. Charles nodded slowly, his mind clearly working through the implications and necessary actions. The public cannot know about this, at least not yet. The damage to the monarchy's reputation would be catastrophic.
Sir Edward and Lady Margaret are already coordinating our response,
William assured him. But Father, there's something else you need to know. Our intelligence suggests that Camilla may have been preparing for this moment. She might have contingency plans. As if summoned by their conversation, Charles's secure phone rang with the distinctive tone reserved for emergency communications. Sir Edward's voice was tense when Charles answered. Your Majesty, we have a situation developing. Several media outlets have received information suggesting that Prince William has been experiencing significant emotional instability and has made unfounded accusations against the Queen Consort. The stories are being positioned as concerns about his fitness for future leadership. Charles and William exchanged a look of grim understanding. Camilla's counterattack had begun even more quickly than they had anticipated.
How long before these stories are published? Charles asked.
The earliest could be within hours, Your Majesty.
We're attempting to contact editors and publishers, but the sources appear to be providing very compelling details about supposed incidents of erratic behavior. Charles ended the call and looked at his son with a mixture of admiration and concern. She's not going to surrender quietly. I never expected her to, William replied. But Father, we have the truth on our side. The evidence against her is overwhelming and independently verified. Whatever stories she tries to plant, we can refute them with facts. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, her medical concerns overriding protocol. Impressive. Your Majesty, your blood pressure has spiked significantly during this conversation. I really must insist that you rest and allow your system to process this information gradually. Charles waved off her concerns with the imperious gesture of a man who had spent his entire life having his health managed by others. I'll rest when my family's reputation is secure, and this betrayal has been properly addressed. He stood from his chair with more strength than he had shown in weeks, the crisis seeming to energize him in ways that medical treatments had failed to achieve. William, I want you to arrange a private meeting with the most senior editors of every major British publication, tonight if possible.
Father, you're not well enough for... I am well enough to protect my family and my throne from a woman who has spent years undermining both. Charles interrupted with finality.
Camilla has made the mistake of believing that my love for her made me blind to her true nature. She's about to discover just how wrong that assumption was. The king moved to his desk and began making notes, his mind clearly organizing a strategy that would counter Camilla's media offensive while protecting the monarchy's interests. William watched his father work, seeing glimpses of the formidable political mind that had guided the royal family through decades of challenges. We need to control this narrative immediately, Charles continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. Camilla's stories will focus on painting you as unstable, because that's the only way she can discredit the evidence against her. We'll respond by releasing carefully selected portions of that evidence, enough to demonstrate the credibility of our accusations without revealing the full scope of the damage. William felt a surge of respect for his father's tactical thinking, even as he worried about the toll this crisis was taking on Charles's health. The man who had seemed so frail an hour earlier was now displaying the sharp political instincts that had made him an effective monarch despite the personal challenges that had marked his reign. "What about Camilla herself?" William asked. "She'll want to make public statements, probably claim she's being unfairly persecuted." Charles's expression hardened, and William saw a glimpse of the royal authority that could crush opposition when properly motivated. She will find that her access to sympathetic media outlets has become surprisingly limited. A few quiet words from the palace can accomplish remarkable things when the monarchy's survival is at stake. The door to the suite opened quietly, and Lady Margaret entered with the discretion that characterized her decades of royal service. Her expression was grave but determined, suggesting she carried news of their developing counter-strategy. "Your Majesty," she said formally, "we've managed to delay the publication of the most damaging stories until tomorrow morning. That gives us approximately 14 hours to implement our response." Charles nodded approvingly. "Excellent. And the Queen Consort's departure from the palace? Completed 30 minutes ago, Your Majesty. She left without incident, though our security personnel reported that she seemed remarkably composed for someone facing such serious accusations." The observation sent a chill through the room. A guilty person facing exposure might be expected to show distress, anger, or at least some emotional response to being caught. Camilla's composure suggested she was operating according to a predetermined plan, which made her significantly more dangerous than a panicked individual acting impulsively. "She's been preparing for this," William said, voicing what everyone in the room was thinking. "The question is, how much damage can she still inflict, and how do we minimize it while protecting the truth?" Charles looked at his son with pride and determination. "We fight back, William. Carefully, strategically, but decisively. Your mother's memory deserves justice. Our family deserves protection, and the British people deserve to know that their monarchy will not tolerate betrayal from within." As evening approached over Windsor Castle, the royal family found itself preparing for a battle unlike any they had faced before. A battle against someone who knew all their secrets, understood all their vulnerabilities, and had spent years positioning herself to exploit both. The emergency editorial meeting at the Times headquarters had never hosted such an extraordinary gathering of Britain's media elite. Representatives from every major newspaper, television network, and digital publication sat around the polished conference table, their faces reflecting the gravity of being summoned for an unprecedented late-night briefing from the palace. Sir Edward Whitmore stood at the head of the table, his usual diplomatic composure replaced by the steely determination of a man defending the constitutional monarchy itself. Behind him, carefully organized displays showed selected portions of the evidence against Camilla, each document authenticated and verified by independent sources. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sir Edward began, his voice carrying the full authority of his position, "what I'm about to share with you represents one of the most serious breaches of royal trust in modern British history. Before we proceed, I need your commitment that this information will be handled with the discretion and responsibility that such extraordinary circumstances demand." Rebecca Matthews, editor of The Guardian, leaned forward in her chair. "Sir Edward, we've all received rather inflammatory information from other sources today suggesting that Prince William has made wild accusations against the Queen Consort. Are we to understand this meeting is related to those reports?" "Indeed it is," Sir Edward replied. "And I'm here to provide you with the evidence that will allow you to make informed decisions about what stories serve the public interest versus what stories serve the interests of those who would manipulate you." He activated a large display screen showing bank transaction records, the financial trail that Detective Inspector Morrison's team had so carefully documented. The room fell silent as the implications became clear. Money from Diana's memorial fund systematically redirected through complex financial instruments, ultimately benefiting organizations with direct ties to Camilla's personal interests. These transactions span 7 years, Sir Edward continued, and represent approximately £2.3 million in charitable funds that never reached their intended recipients. Children's hospitals, landmine victims organizations, homeless shelters, all suffered because money meant to honor Princess Diana's legacy was diverted for personal gain. Thomas Harrison of the Daily Telegraph spoke up, his voice tight with professional skepticism. Material, Sir Edward. But how do we verify that these accusations aren't politically motivated? The Queen Consort has served faithfully for years. In response, Sir Edward displayed a series of phone records and text message exchanges, the communications between Camilla and various journalists, that revealed the systematic leak of private royal information. Dear could see their own colleagues' names in some of the correspondence, creating an uncomfortable recognition of how they had been manipulated. The pattern is unmistakable, Sir Edward explained. Private family conversations were reported in your publications within hours of taking place. Details of Prince William's children, personal health information about King Charles, sensitive discussions about royal duties, all of it sold to the highest bidder or used as currency to purchase favorable coverage. Margaret Foster from the BBC studied the documents with the careful attention of someone who understood the implications for British journalism itself.
Sir Edward, some of these leaked stories helped shape public opinion about the royal family for years.
Are you suggesting that the Queen Consort has been orchestrating a long-term manipulation campaign? I'm presenting you with evidence and allowing you to draw your own conclusions, Sir Edward replied diplomatically. However, I will note that the timing of certain leaks consistently coincided with moments when positive coverage of the Queen Consort would be most beneficial to her public standing. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as editors absorbed the implications. Many of the stories they had published, stories that had won awards and driven public discourse, had been carefully planted by someone with insider access and personal motivations that had nothing to do with serving the public interest. What's the royal family's position on this? Asked James Crawford from Sky News. Are we looking at criminal charges, civil action, immediate consequences? Sir Edward paused before responding, knowing that his next words would shape how this crisis unfolded in the public eye. His Royal Highness Prince William discovered this evidence during a routine security review. When confronted with the facts, the Queen Consort did not deny her actions. She has been asked to remove herself from all royal residences while the full scope of her activities is investigated. Asked to remove herself? Rebecca Matthews pressed. Are you saying she's been exiled from the royal family? I'm saying that her position as Queen Consort is under review pending a complete investigation of these allegations, Sir Edward replied carefully. The king has been informed of the situation and is taking appropriate action to protect the integrity of the monarchy. The diplomatic language could not disguise what was essentially confirmation that Camilla had been expelled from the royal family. The assembled media professionals understood the magnitude of what they were witnessing. The fall of a queen documented with unprecedented transparency. Sir Edward, said David Phillips from ITV. We've all received information suggesting that Prince William may be experiencing emotional instability, that these accusations might be the result of personal animosity rather than genuine wrongdoing. How do you respond to those claims? Sir Edward had been expecting this question, knowing that Camilla's counterattack would focus on discrediting William's credibility. His response was measured but devastating in its implications. The investigation that uncovered these activities was conducted by Detective Inspector Sarah Morrison of the Metropolitan Police Special Branch, acting independently and without any input from Prince William. The financial irregularities were discovered through routine auditing procedures, and the communications evidence was obtained through legal surveillance warrants. Prince William learned of these findings only after they had been thoroughly documented and verified. He paused for effect before continuing. But furthermore, I would note that attempts to discredit the messenger rather than address the evidence itself are exactly the kind of manipulation tactics that these documents reveal the Queen Consort has employed repeatedly over the years. The editors exchanged glances, understanding that they were being presented with the story of a lifetime, but also recognizing their responsibility to handle it in a way that served the public interest rather than sensationalism. Margaret Foster spoke again, her journalistic instincts engaging with the complexity of the situation. Sir Edward, what assurances can you give us that this evidence hasn't been selectively edited or manipulated to support a predetermined narrative? An excellent question, Sir Edward replied, which is why we've arranged for you to have direct access to Detective Inspector Morrison and her investigative team. They will provide you with unedited documentation, expert analysis, and complete transparency about their methods and findings. As if on cue, Detective Inspector Morrison entered the conference room, accompanied by two forensic accountants and a digital communications expert. Her presence transformed the meeting from a palace briefing into a criminal investigation presentation, lending additional gravity to the already serious proceedings. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morrison began, her voice carrying the authority of 20 years in law enforcement, "what you've been shown tonight represents one of the most sophisticated long-term manipulation campaigns I've encountered in my career. The Queen Consort didn't simply steal money or leak information. She orchestrated a systematic campaign to reshape public perception while enriching herself and damaging those she perceived as threats to her position, showing the timeline of Camilla's activities alongside major royal family events, public relations crises, and media coverage patterns. The correlation was undeniable and deeply troubling. Every time Prince William or the Duchess of Cambridge received positive media attention," Morrison explained, "we see a corresponding spike in leaked negative information about their private lives. Every time the king faced health concerns or public criticism, we see strategic releases of information designed to position the Queen Consort as his primary source of support and stability." The assembled editors were witnessing something unprecedented in modern British journalism: complete transparency from law enforcement about ongoing investigations involving the royal family. The implications for press freedom, constitutional monarchy, and public trust were staggering. Detective Inspector asked Thomas Harrison, "In your professional opinion, was the Queen Consort acting alone in these activities, or is there evidence of a broader conspiracy?" Morrison exchanged a glance with Sir Edward before responding. "Our investigation has identified several individuals who assisted in these activities, including private security consultants, financial advisors, and media relations specialists. The full scope of this network is still being mapped, but it appears the Queen Consort was at the center of a sophisticated operation designed to protect and advance her interests at the expense of other royal family members." The revelation that Camilla had not acted alone sent a new wave of concern through the room. If there was indeed a broader network of individuals working to manipulate royal family dynamics and public perception, the implications for British democracy itself were profound. Rebecca Matthews voiced what everyone was thinking. "Detective Inspector, are we looking at charges of fraud, conspiracy, breach of public trust?" "The investigation is ongoing," Morrison replied diplomatically, "but I can confirm that multiple criminal violations appear to have occurred, including financial fraud and conspiracy to defraud charitable organizations." Sir Edward stepped forward again, understanding that the evening's revelations needed to be placed in proper context for the media professionals who would soon be reporting this story to the British public. "Ladies and gentlemen, the royal family finds itself in an unprecedented position," he said. "We are simultaneously the victims of these crimes and the institution responsible for maintaining public confidence in the constitutional monarchy. How this story is reported will significantly impact not just the individuals involved, but the future of the British royal family itself." The weight of responsibility was palpable in the room. These journalists and editors understood that they were being trusted with information that could either strengthen the monarchy by demonstrating its commitment to truth and accountability, or destroy it by revealing corruption at its very heart. "What happens next?" asked James Crawford, his question reflecting the practical concerns of someone who would need to present this complex story to television audiences within hours. "The king will address the nation tomorrow evening," Sir Edward announced, revealing information that had not been previously disclosed. He will explain the situation in his own words, confirm the investigation's findings, and outline the steps being taken to ensure this kind of betrayal never happens again. The announcement of a royal address added yet another layer of historical significance to the evening's events. King Charles would be speaking directly to his subjects about the betrayal of someone he had loved and trusted, potentially ending his marriage while affirming his commitment to the crown's integrity. As the meeting concluded and the media representatives began to file out, each carrying the burden of reporting one of the most significant royal scandals in modern British history, the true scope of Camilla's downfall was becoming clear. She had not simply been caught in financial impropriety or personal betrayal. She had been exposed as someone who had systematically undermined the very institution she was meant to serve, and now that institution was fighting back with every resource at its disposal. The morning newspapers hit the stands at dawn with headlines that sent shockwaves through the British Isles and reverberated around the world. Queen Consort, expelled from palace amid fraud allegations, dominated the Times front page, while The Guardian led with royal betrayal. Evidence reveals years of financial corruption and media manipulation, parading with breaking news updates that left the nation stunned and searching for answers. At Raymel House, Camilla's private residence in Wiltshire, the former queen consort sat in her study, surrounded by the hastily packed belongings that represented the remnants of her royal life. The morning light streaming through the windows illuminated a woman who had aged years in a single day, the carefully maintained facade of royal dignity finally cracking under the weight of exposure and consequences. James Henderson, her security consultant and crisis manager, paced the room with the nervous energy of someone whose carefully laid plans had been systematically dismantled by superior intelligence and resources. The phone calls he had made throughout the night, attempting to activate their media network and control the narrative, had been met with polite refusals and uncomfortable silences. The royal family's preemptive strike had been devastatingly effective. The stories we planted yesterday evening have been completely overshadowed, Henderson reported, his professional composure barely concealing his frustration. Every editor we've worked with over the years has been presented with evidence that makes our version of events look like desperate deflection. Camilla looked up from the newspaper she had been reading, her expression combining rage with the dawning realization that her counterattack had failed completely. "Prepare for this," she said bitterly. "While I thought I was secure in my position, they were building an airtight case against me." "Ma'am, we still have options," Henderson insisted, though his tone lacked conviction. "There are foreign media outlets, international television networks, that would be interested in your side of the story." "My side of the story?" Camilla laughed harshly, a sound devoid of any humor. "What story could I possibly tell that would counter bank records, phone transcripts, and email evidence? That I was trying to protect the monarchy from William's instability? That I was securing financial resources for legitimate purposes? Nobody would believe it, and attempting such explanations would only make me appear more guilty." The sound of vehicles approaching the house interrupted their conversation. Through the window, they could see several official-looking cars with government plates pulling into the circular driveway. The moment Camilla had been dreading since her expulsion from the palace had finally arrived. Detective Inspector Morrison stepped out of the lead vehicle, accompanied by uniformed officers and what appeared to be financial crime specialists carrying boxes of documentation. The investigation that had begun in secret was now becoming a very public legal proceeding. Henderson moved toward the door, but Camilla held up a hand to stop him. "Let them come," she said with resignation. "There's no point in delaying the inevitable." The doorbell rang with surprising politeness given the circumstances. When Camilla answered it herself, she found Detective Inspector Morrison standing on her doorstep with the formal bearing of someone executing an unpleasant but necessary duty. "Beeson Parker Bowles," Morrison said, using Camilla's legal name rather than her royal title. "I have a warrant for your arrest in connection with charges of financial fraud, conspiracy to defraud charitable organizations, and violation of the Official Secrets Act. You have the right to remain silent." As the words of the official caution washed over her, Camilla felt the last vestiges of her royal protection slip away. She was no longer the queen consort, no longer protected by the institution she had spent years manipulating. She was simply a private citizen facing serious criminal charges. "I understand," Camilla replied quietly, extending her hands for the handcuffs with a dignity that surprised even Morrison. "I assume this arrest will be handled with appropriate discretion. You'll be transported to London in an unmarked vehicle," Morrison confirmed, "but I should inform you that media attention will be unavoidable. The charges against you are a matter of significant public interest." As Camilla was led to the waiting car, photographers who had been stationed outside her property since dawn captured images that would define her legacy forever. The former queen consort in handcuffs, her carefully cultivated image of royal respectability finally and permanently shattered. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, King Charles was preparing for what would be the most difficult public address of his reign. The speech had been carefully crafted over the previous 18 hours, balancing the need for transparency with the requirements of maintaining public confidence in the constitutional monarchy. Prince William stood beside his father in the private sitting room that had been converted into a makeshift television studio. The two men had spent the morning reviewing the final draft of the speech, ensuring that every word served both truth and the greater good of the British people. "Are you certain you're strong enough for this, Father?" William asked, noting the pallor in Charles's complexion despite his determined demeanor. "I've never been more certain of anything," Charles replied firmly. "The British people deserve to hear from their monarch about what has happened in their royal family. They deserve to know that we will not tolerate betrayal, regardless of how personally painful the consequences might be." Dr. Harrison entered the room, carrying the medical monitoring equipment that would allow her to track the king's vital signs during the broadcast. The stress of the previous 24 hours had taken a visible toll on Charles's health, but his determination to address the nation personally had overridden all medical concerns. At precisely 8 o'clock that evening, television screens across Britain and around the world showed King Charles seated at his desk in Windsor Castle, the setting deliberately chosen to convey both authority and intimate familial connection. His expression was grave but resolute as he looked directly into the camera that would carry his words to millions of viewers. "My fellow citizens," he began, his voice steady despite the enormous personal cost of what he was about to reveal. "I speak to you tonight about matters that affect not only the royal family, but the very foundation of trust upon which our constitutional monarchy rests." The words that followed were carefully chosen but devastatingly clear. Charles confirmed the investigation's findings, acknowledged the evidence of systematic betrayal by someone he had loved and trusted, and accepted responsibility for the damage that had been done to charitable organizations and public confidence. "The woman who became my wife and your queen consort has been found to have violated that trust in ways that are both personally heartbreaking and constitutionally unacceptable," Charles continued, his voice remaining steady even as the words clearly caused him pain. "She has been removed from all royal duties and residences, and she will face the full consequences of her actions through our legal system." The king's address lasted only 12 minutes, but its impact was immediate and profound. The bottom was raising from shock to sympathy to demands for broader reforms of royal oversight. The revelation that even the queen consort was subject to investigation and consequences seemed to strengthen rather than weaken public confidence in the monarchy's commitment to accountability. In her holding cell at the Metropolitan Police Detention Facility, Camilla watched the broadcast on a small television mounted high on the wall. Publicly renounce their marriage and confirm her disgrace was perhaps the most painful moment in an ordeal that had already cost her everything she had worked to achieve. The man she had married, the institution she had served, and the public she had tried to win over had all turned against her with a unity and decisiveness that left no room for redemption or return. Her attempt to build a lasting legacy as queen consort had instead resulted in her becoming a cautionary tale about the dangers of betraying royal trust. As the weeks that followed would prove, the royal family's handling of Camilla's betrayal had actually strengthened rather than weakened the monarchy. By demonstrating that even the queen consort was subject to accountability and consequences, they had shown the British people that no one was above the law or beyond the reach of justice. Prince William, who had discovered the evidence that brought down his stepmother, found himself elevated in public esteem as someone who had put duty and truth above family loyalty. His confrontation with Camilla, his protection of his mother's legacy, and his support for his father during the crisis established him as a future king who would not tolerate corruption or betrayal. The criminal trial that followed would reveal even more damaging details about Camilla's activities, including evidence of tax evasion, money laundering, and attempts to sell confidential royal information to foreign governments. But by then, the royal family had already moved on, their reputation enhanced by their commitment to transparency and justice. In the end, Camilla's attempt to secure her position through manipulation and betrayal had achieved exactly the opposite result. Instead of becoming a beloved queen consort remembered for her service to the crown, she had become a footnote in royal history, a reminder of what happened to those who forgot that service to the monarchy meant service to something greater than themselves. The rain that had begun the morning of William's confrontation with Camilla finally stopped 3 days later, as if the storm that had engulfed the royal family was finally moving on. In its wake, the British monarchy emerged stronger, more transparent, and more committed than ever to the principles that had sustained it through centuries of change and challenge. William stood once again at his study window in Kensington Palace, but this time he was not looking at evidence of betrayal or preparing for painful confrontations. He was watching his children play in the garden, their laughter a reminder that despite all the darkness that had been revealed, the future of the royal family remained bright and full of promise. The legacy of Princess Diana, which Camilla had tried to diminish and exploit, shone more brightly than ever, protected by a son who had proven that truth and justice would always triumph over manipulation and greed. The words William had hurled at Camilla in anger had proven prophetic. She was not their mother, and she never could be. Diana's memory belonged to those who truly honored her values, not those who exploited her name for personal gain.